So, are criminals born bad or are they made that way? It's a huge question that criminology has been tackling for centuries. And today, we're going to dig into the biological theories that have tried to find an answer. We're going to see how these ideas have changed over time, from some pretty wild theories about faces all the way to modern genetics. And we'll look at the seriously controversial policies they led to. All right, let's jump right in.
For more than 100 years, this has been the central question. Is it possible that some people are just wired differently? That something in their biology makes them more likely to break the law? Okay, let's kick things off way back in 1876 with a guy named Cesare Lombroso. He's often called the founding father of criminology, and he was really the first person to suggest that maybe crime wasn't just a moral issue, but something rooted in a person's physical body. Lombroso had this wild idea he called the atavistic form. He basically argued that criminals were evolutionary throwbacks, like they were less evolved than everyone else. And because of this, they couldn't control their impulses and were physically different from law-abiding citizens.
And get this, Lombroso got super specific. His work was filled with these detailed drawings, linking certain facial features to certain crimes. He actually claimed that thieves had flatter noses while murderers had more pointy ones. I mean, really specific stuff. So after looking at literally thousands of prisoners' skulls, Lombroso came up with a pretty shocking number. He claimed that these atavistic features could explain why up to 40% of all criminal acts were committed, just based on how people looked. Okay, so let's break this down. His theory is, well, pretty much discredited today, but you have to give him some credit. On the one hand, he was the first to try and study crime scientifically and think about preventing it, not just punishing it. But on the other hand, his methods were a mess. He didn't even compare prisoners to a non-criminal group. And of course, his ideas could easily lead to dangerous racism and labeling. All right, fast forward to the 1940s. The idea that biology could be linked to crime evolves a bit. Now we're looking at the theories of William Sheldon, who wasn't focused on the face, but on the whole body. So this guy Sheldon, he proposed that your body shape, your somatotype, was tied to your personality and how likely you were to commit a crime. He came up with 3 types: the softer endomorph, the thin ectomorph, and the muscular mesomorph. And it was the mesomorphs he fingered as the most aggressive, most adventurous, and therefore most likely to be criminals. And he actually tested this. He rated a bunch of college students and delinquents on a 7-point scale for how mesomorphic they were, and the results seemed to back him up. The delinquent group had a noticeably higher average rating of 4.6 compared to the students' 3.8. Now, to be fair, his work got some backup from other studies that found similar things. But, and this is a huge but, there are some major holes here. Like, what about criminals who aren't muscular? This theory can't explain them. And more importantly, this is a classic case of correlation isn't causation. Does having a muscular body make you a criminal, or does living a life of crime make you develop a more muscular body? It's a real chicken or the egg situation. All right, this is where we get into the really big debate. Nature versus nurture. Do our genes actually make us more prone to breaking the law? So how do you even begin to study this? Well, scientists have 2 pretty clever methods. First, there are twin studies, where you compare identical twins who share 100% of their DNA to non-identical twins who share about half. Then you've got adoption studies, which are great for trying to separate genetics from environment by looking at kids who are raised by people other than their biological parents. Take a look at this. A huge study in Denmark found what's called a concordance rate. Basically, if one twin had a criminal record, what were the chances the other one did too? For identical twins, it was 35%. But for non-identical twins, that number plummeted to just 13%. That's a pretty big difference, and it definitely points to a genetic link. And adoption studies? Yep, they tell a similar story. One major study followed over 14,000 adopted kids. It found that if a son's biological parent had a criminal record, there was a 20% chance he would too. But if only his adoptive parent had a record, that chance dropped to under 15%. So what's the big takeaway here? Well, it looks like genes definitely play a part, but they are not the whole story. I mean, if it was all genetics, that concordance rate for identical twins would be 100%, and it's not even close. It just goes to show how incredibly hard it is to ever fully separate nature from nurture. Okay, now let's zoom in on a really specific and pretty controversial genetic theory from the 1960s, the idea of a so-called crime chromosome. What you're looking at here is a map of human chromosomes. Now, typically, males have one X and one Y. But what if a guy is born with an extra Y chromosome? It's a rare condition, only about 1 in 1,000 men have it. But back in the 60s, some researchers started to think this XY anomaly might be linked to aggression and violence. And that's how we got this label, the super male. It created this stereotype of men who were really tall, muscular, maybe had learning difficulties, and were just ticking time bombs of violence.
So, did they find anything? Well, early on, they did find more XYY men in prisons than you'd expect. But hold on, this theory has some serious problems. First off, it's super rare, so it can't explain much crime at all. But the bigger issue is the risk of a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you label tall guys with lower intelligence as potential criminals, are they more likely to get caught and convicted? It's a very real possibility.
Okay, this is where it all gets very real. If you start believing crime is biological, what kind of policies does that lead to? How does it shape the real world? And, the answers can get pretty extreme. We're talking about everything from trying to cure people with medication and vitamins to the absolutely horrifying practice of eugenics, all the way to the most final punishment of all. So, do any of these policies actually work? Let's take a look. Biochemical treatments, like giving prisoners vitamin supplements, have actually shown some partial success. But then you have eugenics, compulsory sterilization. Is it effective? Absolutely not. It's completely unethical and based on terrible science, infamously used by Nazi Germany. And the death penalty? Well, the data shows it's not a deterrent. In fact, in the US, the states that don't have it actually have lower murder rates. And that leaves us right here with a massive question to think about. We've seen that biology can be a factor, but it is never, ever destiny. So as we learn more and more about genetics in the brain, the real challenge is figuring out what role, if any, that knowledge should have in our justice system.